Okay, so looking at the first problem, the information that's given to us, he fell at a plane of 33,000 feet above Mont Blanc, which rises 15,777 feet above sea level. Because there's doesn't say the word velocity anywhere in this problem, we can immediately know this is a falling objects problem, which the model h of t equals negative 16 t squared plus h naught. So now we have to decide what our h of t is and what our h naught is. The question is asking if their parachutes failed to open, how long would they be airborne before hitting Mont Blanc? So our ending height or our current height is when they hit Mont Blanc. They're starting 33,000 feet above Mont Blanc, so that would be our initial height. Mont Blanc rises 15,777 feet above sea level. So that is what we are trying. That is our ending height. Now we can use this information and plug it in. 15,777 equals negative 16 t squared plus 33,000. We are solving for t, therefore, in order to get t by itself, our first move is to get rid of this 33,000. $15,777 minus 33,000, negative 17,223 equals negative 16 t squared. Our next step is to get rid of this negative 16. So we're going to divide both sides by negative 16. This divided out, 1,076.44 equals t squared. Our next step, take the square root of both sides. I'm going to move my answer up here. When we take the square root of both sides, we are left with plus or minus 32.81 equals t. Because we have to relate this back to our problem, time can never be negative. Therefore, I'm going to write it down here. They would be airborne for 32.81 seconds before hitting Mont Blanc. And that is your final step to this problem, writing that sentence and connecting it back to the real world question. Now we're asked, how long would it take for them to hit the ground? The height of our ground, 0. So we're going to do the same thing, except now our ending height is 0. Plug everything back into our original falling objects model. We are solving for t, therefore, let's move this 33,000 over. Negative 33,000 equals negative 16 t squared. Next step, let's get rid of that negative 16. 33,000 divided by negative 16. 2,062.5 equals t squared. We have to take the square root of both sides. And we're left with t equals plus or minus 45.41. And although that's our numerical final answer, we have to connect it back to the real world question. It would take 45.41 seconds for them to hit the ground. Sorry, it's a little slanted. It would take 45.41 seconds for them to hit the ground. Okay, let's look at our next problem. So our first key piece of information is they give us a model. So we have a model. We don't have to refer back to or make our own model. They give us our H0. Now we have to figure out our H of t. The question is asking, if Stephen slips, falls, and hits the second ledge of the waterfall, how many seconds would that take? So we have to find the height of the second ledge of the waterfall. The second ledge is at 294 feet. So our H of t, our height that the question is asking, is 294, and we're given this model. What do? Plug in our information. 294 equals negative 16 t squared plus 801. We are solving for t, therefore our first move, let's get rid of that 801. 294 minus 801, I got negative 507 equals negative 16 t squared. Divide by negative 16. You're left with 31.69 equals t squared. In order to get this to a t squared, doing the opposite of that, getting rid of the squared, take the square root. Square root of 31.69 is 5.63. T equals plus or minus 5.63. When we put this in sense of what our problem is asking, it would take 5.63, notice how it's positive because time is always positive, seconds for Stephen to hit the second ledge. Okay? Moving on to number 3. Take a minute, read that to yourself. So reading through, we see the word velocity. Therefore, we know this is going to be a velocity problem. We're also given the model. So now all we have to figure out is this h of t. The question says, at what 2 moments in time does Pavel pass the height of the cameraman? So let's go back into the problem and figure out what the height of the cameraman is. The cameraman who took this shot is standing on a platform 24 feet off the ground. So that is our h of t. And we're given our model. So now let's plug in the information we have. 24 equals negative 9.1 x squared plus 38.34x minus 11.12. In order to get this in the form that we want when we're talking about velocity problems, we need this equation to be set equal to 0. So let's get rid of that 24. Because we want this whole thing to set equal to 0 in order to figure out our a, b, and c and use the quadratic formula. Negative 11.12 minus 24 gives you a negative 35.12. Okay, so now we know we have our a, b, and c. My A, negative 9.1, B, 38.34, C, negative 35.12. So now we're going to use the quadratic formula, which is x equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Memorize this formula for the test tomorrow. Okay, so now let's plug in our information that we have. Negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4 times a times c. All over 2a. Let's do some simplifying. This we can drop right back down. The square root of 38.34 squared, 1,469.96. If you round to 3 decimal places, that's okay as well. We have a negative times a negative times a negative. Therefore, our sign is going to be negative. Now we can just multiply that for 9.135.12. And we get 1,278.37. 2 times negative 9.1, negative 18.2. 1,469.96 minus 1,278.37. I got 191.59. Again, if you round it to 3 decimal places, that's okay. The square root of 191.59. Whoop. The square root of this 13.84. So now we're going to have 2 answers. We're going to have negative 38.34 plus 13.84 all over negative 18.2. And we're going to have negative 38.34 minus 13.84 all over negative 18.2. With our first one, the numerator, negative 38.34 plus 13.84, negative 24.5. When we divide that out, a negative divided by a negative is going to be a positive, so it's going to give us a positive 1.35. This is our first answer. Second answer, when you subtract out the numerator, you get negative 52.18 all over negative 18.2. Negative divided by a negative, positive. Okay, so even though we got 2 positive answers, even though, and sometimes usually we get 1 negative, 1 positive, that's okay, because the question is asking at what 2 moments. So that automatically told us there's going to be 2 times when he passed that certain height. Therefore, our final statement, Pavel passes the height of the cameraman at 1.35 seconds and 2.87 seconds. And that is your final statement. Okay. Flip to number 4. Okay, so again, after you read through it, automatically we know this is going to be a velocity problem because it literally says the word velocity, vertical velocity of 19.8 feet. Releases the ball, this basketball player releases the ball at a height of 9 feet, and we are trying to see how long it takes the ball to reach the basket, which is at 10 feet. So the first thing we're going to do, our starting height, our velocity, and our ending height. He releases the ball at a height of 9 feet. That's our starting height. They give your velocity 19.8, and your ending height, or the basketball hoop, which is what the question is asking for how long it takes to reach the hoop, is 10 feet. The model for a velocity problem, h of t equals negative 16t squared plus v naught t plus h naught. We have all this information, so all we have to do now is plug it in. 10 equals negative 16t squared plus 19.8t plus 9. We need this to be set equal to 0, so let's just get rid of that 10. 0 equals negative 16 t squared plus 19.8 t minus 1. So now at this point we have our A, B, and C. My A is negative 16, my B 19.8, and my C negative 1. Let's plug it into the quadratic formula. We know the quadratic formula based on the previous problem. X equals negative B plus or minus square root B squared minus 4AC all over 2A. Negative B plus or minus square root B squared minus 4 times A times C all over 2 times A. So we have negative 19.8 plus or minus 19.8 squared, 392.04. We have a negative times a negative times a negative. That's going to give us a negative. 4 times 16 times 1, 64. 2 times negative 16, negative 32. Negative 19.8 plus or minus 392.04 minus 64, 328.04 all over negative 32. I'm going to extend that up here. So we have negative 19.8 plus or minus square root of 328.04. I got to be 18.11. And again, if you round to 3 decimal places, that's perfect. I just have it rounded to 2. And it should specify on the test how many decimal places they want you to round. Okay? So now we're going to have 2 answers. We're going to have negative 19.8 plus 18.11 divided by negative 32. Oops. And we're going to have negative 19.8 minus 18.11 all divided by negative 32. For the first one, the numerator, negative 1.69 divided by negative 32, which I got, a negative divided by negative is a positive, I got to 0.05. Second one, numerator, negative 37.91 divided by negative 32. Again, a negative divided by a negative, positive. So we have 2 positive answers. And again, usually with velocity, we get 1 positive and 1 negative. So let's think about this. How long does it take for the ball to reach the basket? And we have 2 times. So here's our basket. And the ball, this is when the ball goes through the basket. So now if you look, there's another moment in time where that ball is the same height as when it reaches the basket. So now we have 2 times. This would be the shorter amount of time since it left the basketball player's hands. This would be the longer amount of time. And because they're asking for when it shoots through the basket, 1.18 would be your answer. So a final sentence to sum that up. It takes 1.18 seconds for the ball to reach the basket. So if you're doing out the math and you're getting 2 positive answers and you're 100% sure about it, that you didn't make any math errors, go back, read the question. Because one is going to make more sense unless, like the before problem, they ask for 2 moments in time. Okay, so now we're just asking how long it would take for the ball to hit the ground if he missed the shot. So now we're measuring not if he gets into the basket at 10 feet, if he hits the ground. Our height of ground is 0. Now our h of t is 0. Our h naught still stays 9, and our v naught is still the same. So if we plug this into the formula, we have 0 equals negative 16t squared plus 19.8t plus 9. We can label our A, B, and C. Negative 16, 19.8, and 9. Now we're going to plug all this information into the quadratic formula. So we have a negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2 times a. Negative 19.8 plus or minus square root. What is 19.8 squared? 392.04. We have a negative times a negative times a positive, so our next number is going to be added to this number. 4 times 16 times 9, 576. 2 times negative 16 is negative 32. $392.04 plus 576, 968.04. The square root of 968.04, 31.11. So now we're going to have 2 answers. We're going to have negative 19.8 plus 31.11, all divided by negative 32, and minus 31.11. Negative 19.8 plus 31.11 is positive 11.31. Positive divided by a negative is going to come out negative. I got negative 0.35. Numerator, negative 19.8 minus 31.11. I got negative 50.91. A negative divided by a negative is a positive. Because we are talking about time, time can never be negative. Therefore, our only answer is 1.59. And to bring that back into the context of the problem, if he, the basketball player, had missed the shot, it would take 1.59 seconds for the ball to hit the ground. And that's it. That's your answer. Okay, factoring. M of x equals negative 5x minus 8x cubed. To put this in standard form, we need the highest exponent first. Goes in order from highest to lowest. Negative 8x cubed minus 5x. Our leading coefficient is always the coefficient attached to the variable with the highest degree. Negative 8. Our degree is always the highest degree, which is 3. Constant term is the number with no variable attached to it. In this case, there are no numbers with no variable or no x attached to it, so our constant term would be 0. We have a degree of 3, so the name of this, cubic. Another name of this, a polynomial with only 2 terms, is binomial. Looking at the next one, we have f of x equals, oh, and something I forgot, m of x equals that. F of x equals negative 2x squared plus 9x to the 5th power plus 3. To write this in standard form, the degree has to go in order from highest to lowest. 9x to the 5th minus 2x squared plus 3. Leading coefficient, 9. Always the number attached to the term, to the variable with the highest degree. My degree, which is the highest degree, is 5. Constant term, 3. There's no x attached to it. And a name, because there's no specific name for an exponent greater than 4, you would just put 5th degree. And the type of polynomial, because it has 3 terms, is a trinomial. Moving on to the next view, identify the GCF of the following polynomial. We have 6, 18, 21, and 30. They all can be divided by 3. They each have x terms, x variables attached to them. Therefore, we can take out the smallest amount of x's, x squared. Number 8, they are both divisible by 9. They both have y's, so the most you can take from both of them is 4. We can't take any b's from each because 9y to the 5th does not have any b variables attached to it. Number 9, identify and factor out the GCF given each of the following polynomials. Whenever we have a negative coefficient in the front, we have to factor out a negative GCF. They all can be divisible by 4. They all have n's, but we can only take 1 from each because the smallest term has 1 n. They all have y's, so we can take y's. This one only has 1 y, so we can only take 1 from each. And then we have to factor it out, so we have to write what's left. For the first term, 10n squared y is left. 12 divided by negative 4, negative 3. 4 n's left if you took 1. 2 y's left if you took 1. Negative 16 divided by negative 4. Plus 4. We took 1 n and they have 1, so we're not going to, there's nothing going to be left over. They have 2 y's when we took 1, so there's going to be 1 y left over. 32 divided by negative 4, negative 8. They had 3 n's, we took 1, so there's 2 left. They had 1 y, we took 1 y, so there's none left. Next one, a GCF. They all can be divisible by 9. They all have x's, therefore we can take 2 x's from each. If he had $3, he had $5, he had $2, we can take $2 from each person. This term has no h's, so we can't factor out any h's. Left with 2x h cubed plus, there's 3x's left, 2h's left, negative 18 divided by 9 minus 2. They had 2 x's, we took out 2, there's none left. Factor the following quadratic equation. Show all your work and box your final answer. X squared plus 22x plus 72. We know we're going to have x in the front. Two numbers that multiply to 72 and add to 22. 4 and 18 multiply to 72. And add to 22. 18 plus 4 is 22. The C term is positive, which means the signs are going to be the same. Our B term is positive, which means they both have to be plus signs. X squared minus 17x minus 30. Two numbers that multiply to 30 and might add to 17. I would say 2 and 15. We have a negative C term and a negative B term. So if we have a negative C term, they both have to be, the signs have to be opposite. But if the signs are opposite in any way, we can't get to negative 17. This one is not factorable. Even if you were to put x minus 15 and x minus 2, a negative times a negative is a positive, not a negative. So it doesn't work. This is a binomial. Therefore, the only two numbers that multiply to negative 1 and add to 0, since there's no middle term, would be a positive 1 and a negative 1. 14. We have 5x squared plus 15x minus 50. We have a GCF of 5. We can pull 5 out from each of these terms. When we do that, we're left with x squared plus 3x minus 10. So now we can factor out this middle part. We still bring down our 5. That doesn't disappear. Two numbers that multiply to 10 and add to 3. 2 and 5. The 5 has to be positive. The 2 has to be negative. They multiply to negative 10, add to positive 3. Don't forget to do this step because it'll mess up your factoring if you don't. 15, 7x squared plus 23x plus 6. There is no GCF. There's no number that divides 7, 23, and 6. Therefore, we can move right into our factoring step. Factors of A are 1 and 7. Factors of C, 1, 6, 2, 3. Let's try 3 and 2. This inner and outer give us middle. We have 2x and 21x. Can that be combined to get to 23? Yes. Both signs have to be positive, which makes sense because our C term is positive, therefore the signs have to be the same. And they are. So you get left with 7x plus 2 and x plus 3. 16, there is no GCF, or the GCF is 1, so we don't pull anything out. So we can move right into our factoring step. Some factors of 28, 4 and 7, 2 and 14, 1 and 28. Let's figure out what of those are going to add to 11. 7 and 4 add to 11. They both have to be positive. And our C term is positive, therefore the signs have to be the same, which they are. Number 17, 3x squared minus 3x minus 36. We can pull a GCF of 3 out. Let's do that first. We pull 3 out, we're left with x squared minus x minus 12. Now we can factor out this inside part. Again, don't forget to bring down that 3. Two numbers then multiply to negative 12 and add to negative 1, 3 and 4. The 4 would have to be negative, because negative 4 plus 3 is negative 1. Negative 4 times 3 is negative 12. That works out. 18, we cannot pull out a GCF because this is just 1. So we're going to move right into our factoring step. We can list factors of A and C. A, 1 and 3. C, 2 and 12. 3 and 8. 6 and 4. 1 and 24. So let's try 3 and 8. Inner, 8x. Outer, 9x. Can that be combined to get to a positive 1? Yes. Our 8 would have to be negative, and our 9 would have to be positive. Oops. Okay. Number 19, we have 5x squared minus 17x minus 40. Nothing divides 5, 17, and 40. That's the same number. Therefore, we can move right into our factoring step. Factors of A are 1 and 5, which we have. Factors of C, 2 and 40. I'm sorry. 2 and 20, 4 and 10, 5 and 8. To figure out which factor to choose so that it adds to a negative 17. Let's try 5 and 8. $8x and 25x. Well, if we have a negative 25 and we add 8, we get a negative 17. So let's do that. And that's your answer. Because now we have a positive 8x minus 25x. That gives us a negative 17x. Okay? Number 20, they can all be divisible by 6. When we pull out a 6, we're left with x squared plus 4x plus 3. We can factor this inside part, therefore drop down the 6, again, don't forget. X times x, which numbers multiply to 3, only 1 and 3 are options, and add to 4. When they're both positive, when we add 3 and we add 1, we get 4. When we multiply 1 and 3, we get 3. So that's our answer. If you guys have any questions, send me a message on Remind, send me an email. Let me know and I'll help you work through.